Imagine if you got pregnant and had a baby right when you were about to graduate high school. Your whole life would probably be pretty stressful, especially if your boyfriend was the son of a powerful billionaire and a well-known celebrity. Well, imagine if on top of all that you were accused of cheating on him. It would be awful. Well, this was exactly what happened to Catherine Howard, who was a 17-year-old girl who became the fifth wife of England's King Henry VIII in 1540. To make matters worse, Catherine would soon be executed because of her so-called crime. But how did this happen? Let's find out in today's video. Catherine Howard was a very different kind of bride for the aging and obese King Henry VIII. In fact, she was everything his previous wives were not. While his first two wives, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, were mature women who challenged him intellectually, his third and fourth wives, Jane Seymour and Anne of Cleves, were young, quiet, and submissive. Catherine Howard, on the other hand, was a vivacious teenager when she entered the royal court, and she was full of energy. She danced with such vigor that one chronicler reported she could dance all day and would not be tired. And even though Henry was more than twice her age, they had a connection based on youth and playfulness. He delighted in giving her expensive gifts, including dresses and jewels. And there were even rumors that he gave her a chariot like the ones used by pagan goddesses. This was because Henry enjoyed watching her drive around the palace grounds in it. But despite the king's adoration for his new wife, their marriage wasn't perfect. You see, Catherine had a secret that nobody told Henry. She had been a wild child, and she slept with several men before her marriage to the king. This included her former music tutor, the young and handsome Henry Mannix, who she reportedly loved dearly. According to some reports, Catherine had even become pregnant by Manoir and had an abortion. She also slept with a young man named Francis Dereham when she was just 15 years old, and he was 26. When Catherine learned that King Henry wanted to marry her, she broke off the relationship and gave up Dereham, who was living in her household as her footman. However, even though she ended things with him, she still appointed him as her secretary upon becoming queen. She also gave another position to a man named Thomas Culpeper, who was a handsome courtier and a close friend of the king. Ironically, both of these men were the ones who would bring about Catherine's downfall. It started when Catherine was accused of having an affair with Culpeper, a woman who was serving as a lady-in-waiting in Catherine's household, wrote a letter informing Archbishop Thomas Cranmer about the affair. Cranmer was the head of the Church of England and the man whom Henry trusted to keep him informed about his wife's activities. In his deposition, he stated that the letter was given to him on the eve of the Assumption, which is September 7, 1541. According to him, the author of the letter told him that she wished to inform him of the Queen's misconduct without revealing her own identity, so she slipped the letter in his hands and left. When Cranmer opened the letter, he found that it was written by an anonymous lady of the Queen's privy chamber, and it contained detailed accusations against Catherine. The letter claimed that the Queen had been unfaithful to the king with Culpeper and Dereham, and it provided specific details that proved that the author was indeed in the Queen's service. Not wanting to risk being accused of slander, The Archbishop decided to give the letter to the king himself. He delivered the letter to Henry on September 18, 1541, and it profoundly shocked the king, who couldn't believe that his young wife was cheating on him. You see, since marrying Catherine, Henry had bragged to his courtiers about her supposed purity and how much he liked that she hadn't had sex before their marriage. He had even joked that he wouldn't mind if she took lovers after he died, implying that he trusted her completely. Now, after reading the letter, he felt humiliated and betrayed by both his wife and Culpia, who he considered to be his friend. And to make matters worse, he had no idea whether or not the letter was true. Catherine could have been set up, and he might have been tricked into believing that she was having an affair. Henry knew he had to act quickly if he wanted to save face. He summoned Catherine to his court and ordered her to explain herself. At this point, Catherine knew she was in trouble. However, she didn't confess to anything. Instead, she tried to defend herself by saying that people sometimes write false letters to harm others. Unfortunately for her, though, Henry didn't buy her excuse and immediately ordered her arrest. After her arrest, Catherine was sent to Hampton Court Palace, where she spent for months under house arrest. It was during this time that she experienced a complete mental breakdown. People who lived near the palace heard her screaming in the middle of the night. She cried out, "Oh, my lord, why do you send me such tormentors?" Other times, she would call out the king's name and beg him to forgive her. The guards stationed outside her room reported hearing her say, "I am undone. Oh, my sweet lord, my king, have mercy." However, there's a twist to this tale. While Catherine was begging the king for forgiveness, she had no idea why he was angry. He hadn't told her what she had done wrong, and she thought she had done nothing. It wasn't until much later that she realized that her former secretary, Francis Dereham, had confessed to sleeping with her, and even then she was still unaware that he had also implicated Culpia. In the end, after 4 months of imprisonment, Catherine finally understood why she was in trouble, and when she learned that Dereham had betrayed her, she was devastated. In fact, it was then that her health really started to decline. She developed a high fever, chills, weakness, and loss of appetite. All of these symptoms led to weight loss and vomiting. She also had nightmares every night, which made her entire ordeal even more terrifying. On December 13, 1541, her condition became so dire that she couldn't get out of bed, and over the next few weeks, she became skinnier and weaker. On January 29, 1542, her doctor visited her one last time, knowing that she wouldn't survive, and he wrote a description of her illness and her state of mind. According to his report, Catherine was deeply disturbed and had lost all hope. She had been asking for Holy Communion and had confessed that she had committed serious sins. However, when she was told that she would be allowed to receive communion, she replied, "No, God damn it, I will not take it." Then she begged for forgiveness from her family and friends. After that, she went back to bed and never got up again. She died on February 10, 1542, and her title as queen was stripped away the same day. According to official records, she was taken to the Tower of London to await her execution. However, there's some confusion about how she got there. One account states that she rode in a horse-drawn carriage, but this isn't likely because she was already too sick to travel. Another account says that she was carried in a coffin, which seems more plausible. Regardless of how she got to the tower, it's clear that Catherine was terrified of what was going to happen to her. For example, on the evening of February, someone was heard crying out, "Beware, beware, the Queen is come," shortly before Catherine arrived. Also, when she reached the tower, she refused to enter the building, insisting that they would kill her without giving her a chance to say goodbye to her friends and family. She stayed outside the tower for 3 days, during which time her relatives brought her food and other supplies. Eventually, though, she was forced inside, and her relatives never saw her alive again. The exact date of Catherine's execution is unknown, but it most likely took place on February 13th, 1542. That's because the next entry in the tower's record book states that the bodies of 2 prisoners were taken from the tower on the 13th and buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. These prisoners were listed as the Lady Catherine Howard, Queen, and Dr. John Feckenham, who was the former abbot of Westminster. Since the executioner had to obtain permission from the king before carrying out the sentence, it's safe to assume that Catherine was executed right after the record book was updated. Although the accounts of her death differ, one thing is certain: her final moments were dignified and courageous. Unlike the executions that had taken place in the tower before hers was meant to be discreet. However, many people gathered to watch her walk to the scaffold on Tower Hill. According to historian Susan James, Catherine appeared calm and composed. Even though she was a frightened young girl, her body trembled, but her resolve was firm, and she held her head high. When she approached the block, she asked for a white sheet to cover her head, and her request was granted. Then she laid down on the velvet cushion and prepared for the executioner to strike the fatal blow. At that moment, she said something that would echo throughout history. No one knows exactly what her last words were, but they were either a confession of her sins or a plea for mercy on her soul. Either way, her words served as a reminder of her humanity and the tragedy of her situation. After saying her final words, the executioner placed the velvet cushion over her head and dealt her a single blow with his axe. He struck her neck so powerfully that her head was severed from her body immediately. This ensured that she didn't feel any pain or suffer for long. After chopping off her head, the executioner lifted it up and showed it to the crowd. Then he dropped it into a bag along with her internal organs. Her headless body was wrapped in a red cloth, and her head was sewn up in a leather bag. Both were buried in an unmarked grave near the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, and the spot where she was laid to rest became a popular pilgrimage site for people visiting the tower. Over the years, people believed that her remains were lying beneath the floor of the chapel, and they flocked to the site to pay their respects. They also believed that her grave could cure various ailments, and many of the visitors were even willing to dig up her bones to use in homemade remedies. Unfortunately, none of these efforts were successful, and eventually Catherine's grave was forgotten. Today, historians believe that she is buried in the southeast corner of the chapel. near the remains of her cousin, Anne Boleyn, who was also executed by Henry. The story of Catherine Howard is a sad one. She was a young girl who was thrust into the middle of a world of political intrigue and betrayal. She was just 17 years old when she married Henry VIII, and she had no idea what she was getting herself into. She was accused of having an affair with one of the king's closest friends and was subsequently executed. The whole situation was a mess. Catherine made the mistake of keeping her former lover, Francis Dereham, in her household, and once he confessed to the king, she was doomed. Henry was furious, and he wanted to make an example of her. By executing her, he sent a message to the rest of the court that he would not tolerate any disloyalty. What do you think? Was Catherine Howard right to trust her cousin's advice and go ahead with the marriage to Henry? Or should she have listened to her mother and turned down the proposal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical tales.